I love that story. And Antoine, I've gotten to know him over the last few years and especially recently over the last few months. And it's incredible to see the steps that he's taking because not only did he re-engage in church and take that step of getting baptized, but literally over the last few weeks, he has personally invited, I think it's got to be up to 16 people now to come over the last few Sundays. And so I just love the passion. And that's who we want to be. We want to be people that experience the goodness of God and recognize that we are not the only ones that are looking for this. We're not the only ones that are looking for hope or purpose or forgiveness or a sense of fullness of life, because ultimately we are all searching for something that only God can provide. And so I'm so proud of Antoine, and I love that story, and it's such a great glimpse of who we want to be as a church together. Well, happy Labor Day. It is Labor Day weekend, and like I kind of referenced earlier, it's about 1,000 degrees outside, so hopefully you guys are figuring out ways to stay cool. I know that there's a lot of people watching on Facebook. I know that there's a lot of people watching on the church online platform as well. So I would love for you guys, just out of curiosity, and I love being able to go through and read all those comments after services are done, but if you had to choose between cooling off at a pool or cooling off at the ocean, which one would you choose? Are you more of like take me to the beach any day or take me to the pool any day? I would love to know which one you are. I know which one I am, and I don't want to tell you because then you'll all just obviously pick the one that I am because you want to be cool like that. No, for sure, pool any day of the week. Why would I not want to be in a pool? It's fantastic. Unfortunately, my wife would pick the beach any day of the week, and so that's always a little bit of a challenge, but we'll hopefully be able to experience a little bit of both this weekend as well as you guys. Man, as a pastor, one of the things I get to do a lot of, which is a lot of fun, is officiate weddings. I've been able to officiate a number of weddings for people in South Hills, as well as I've got some coming up. Shout out to Tim and Kelsey if you guys are watching this morning. And also Christian and Annie are coming up. Mark is coming up. Mark plays bass a lot of times. Mark and his fiancee Brittany. Man, there's like 3 weddings from South Hills coming up in the next few months, which is awesome. Wedding planning is crazy. If you guys have gotten married, you understand that. And even if you're pretty easygoing, there's still just so many things to kind of get through to get to that day. There's so much that leads up to that day. And then that day, all of a sudden, there's supposed to just be a shift. And it's supposed to just go from planning, budgeting, stress, navigating, figuring out, making all these decisions to then all of a sudden on this day now, I'm just enjoying, which is super hard to do. And so I've kind of gotten in the habit of when I officiate weddings, ultimately the couple ends up standing in front of me. And there's this moment where I tell them before we go any further, before we start the rest of the ceremony or anything, I say, okay, you've made it. Take a breath. And they take a deep breath and usually kind of a little bit awkward and worried they're going to do something wrong. And I say, this is what you've been working towards. Say, why don't you look back at all of the people that are here that are supporting you? Look back at kind of just metaphorically look back at all you've done to get to this moment. So they'll look back and people are waving. And of course, all of the aunts are taking pictures on their phones and all this kind of stuff. And I say, now look again at each other because this is what your future is. And so then they kind of turn their gaze and they start to focus a little bit more in that moment. And it always ends up being this kind of peaceful like reset of all of the anticipation and all of the anxiety and all of the questions about what's going to go right and what's going to go wrong and is everybody here that needs to be here. All of a sudden in that moment, they're finally able to breathe. They're finally able to get kind of some perspective of, man, we have done so much to get here. And now let's enjoy this and let's figure out what does it look like for us to move forward together. And I think for a lot of ways, that's really my hope for today. That's kind of what Labor Day weekend is on its own. You know, Labor Day weekend is kind of the official or unofficial, I don't know, it's what I view as kind of the end of summer and the beginning of fall. It's the end of summer break and relaxation and freedom and the beginning of routines in some way. It's the end of, generally speaking, really hot weather, and it starts to cool off, although we may not be that lucky right now. It's kind of this weird pivot weekend. It's like a dividing line between everything that we have been doing, and then all of a sudden when Labor Day hits, I mean, even a couple weeks ago, I was having a conversation with somebody, and they said, yeah, let's just like plan it for after Labor Day. And I've heard that so many times. It's this idea of like, there's before Labor Day, and then there's after Labor Day. And this weekend is this weird kind of pivot, dividing line change that we all deal with in so many aspects of our lives. And I wanted to talk about that today because I feel like there's an aspect of our spiritual lives and there's an aspect of the way that plays into our emotions and our finances and our relationships and all of these other aspects. I feel like we need to have one of those moments. We need to be able to take a moment and breathe. We need to be able to take a moment and just recognize, acknowledge all that we've been through over the last 6 months specifically. But even for many of us, it's not just COVID, it's the last season. Maybe you've been dealing with relational tensions. Maybe you've been dealing with, I know some people are dealing with health diagnosis and challenge that are totally unrelated to just the last 6 months of COVID-19 and all of that reality. Maybe there's goals or dreams that were sidelined. I don't know what it might be for you, but I feel like there's an opportunity for us today to take a pause and take a breath and say, this could be the pivot moment. This could be the time when I shift, I take a breath, and then I start moving forward. Maybe you feel like you've been stuck for a while and you haven't moved anywhere. That's what I want to talk about today. And in fact, the Apostle Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament is actually a collection largely of letters and first-person accounts of Jesus' life, as well as the teachings based on Jesus' life and the way that the first Christians, the very first churches and the first gatherings of Christians, this is the stuff that they would wrestle with and they would deal with. And there's so much incredible stuff in there. The Apostle Paul, he actually has one of these moments in a letter that he wrote to a church that it was a brand new church in the city of Philippi. The letter, the book in the Bible is called Philippians, but it was a letter to the Philippians and this new church, and it's an incredible letter. There's actually some of my favorite passages are in the book of Philippians, and so if you're looking for somewhere to start reading, I would encourage you, especially in this time, maybe start reading in Philippians. There's a lot of incredible encouragement and direction in there. But Paul kind of articulates this pivot idea, there's a dividing line. There is a before and there is an after, and the way that we decide to move forward from this moment is crucial. So he says it this way in Philippians chapter 3, verse 4 is where it starts. He says, "Indeed, if others have reason for confidence in their own efforts, I have even more." So he's very humble man. He goes on and he says, "I was circumcised when I was 8 days old." When was the last time you bragged about that? No, I'm just kidding. This is a very kind of traditional Jewish thing. This was like, man, if you want to be a good Jewish man, which is what he's going to go into here. So he starts off with, let me tell you, from the beginning, I was awesome. Is essentially what he says. I was circumcised when I was 8 days old. I am a pure-blooded citizen of Israel, a Jewish nation. He is fully Hebrew man and a member of the tribe of Benjamin. So again, this in the Israelite nation, there was 12 tribes. And so he's saying, not only was I circumcised when I was supposed to be, I am fully Jewish, and I'm from the tribe of Benjamin, which was kind of bragging rights type of situation. He says, I'm a real Hebrew if there ever was one. I was a member of the Pharisees, which the Pharisees were the most religious people of the day. They were the ones that not only followed the law to a T, but they were the ones that made sure everybody else was also following the law to the T. I was a member of the Pharisees who demanded the strictest obedience to the Jewish law. I was so zealous that I harshly persecuted the church, meaning the Jesus followers. Paul was not a Jesus follower when Jesus was doing his earthly ministry. Paul, actually, after Jesus, the resurrection, Paul would go around and persecute. He would attack. He would kill church leaders, people that were following Jesus, because he felt like they were taking people away, leading people away from the one true God of Israel. He did not believe in Jesus. He actually persecuted the church. And as for righteousness, I obeyed the law without fault. So he is saying, man, I had everything going for me. From a religious standpoint, I followed every aspect of the law. I was a true Hebrew person. I was from the tribe of Benjamin. I knew all of the laws. I held other people to that standard. And in many ways, and we kind of have this perspective oftentimes where we actually tear down the Pharisees, and there was a lot of ways that where they missed it, but they were trying so hard to be the best that they could be according to the law, which I think a lot of us try. We try and be the best that we can be according to this list of to-dos and not to-dos. Paul is saying, I obeyed the law without fault. I had everything going for me. He would have had money. He would have had notoriety. He was someone that would have had kind of this track record of success in his life. And he goes on in verse 7 and he says, I once thought that these things were valuable. All of those things that I just bragged about, that you were like, oh, that is pretty impressive, Paul. I once thought all of these things were valuable, but now I consider them worthless because of what Christ has done. And I just want to pause there. He's not saying that the effort that he put into his life is worthless. He's not saying that his family is worthless or his traditions are worthless. He's saying that they do not have the value or the importance that I thought that they did, because now I recognize that value and importance and significance only comes through Christ. It does not come through what I do, what I've accomplished, who I have helped, who I have fought against. It only comes through Christ. I once thought all of these things were valuable, but now I consider them worthless because of what Christ has done. Yes, everything else is worthless when compared with the infinite value of knowing Jesus Christ as my Lord. He's saying, man, I had it all going for me. And when I look back, I see that it just kind of pales in comparison of what is ahead of me. Then, man, there was a system that worked for me. And when I look back, I recognize that that system pales in comparison of what I should be moving at in the future. He's saying, man, I had figured out how to be faithfully religious. And as I look back at all of the ways that I was able to accomplish that and check all those boxes, I recognize that as I move forward, it is a totally different scoreboard, if you will. It pales in comparison of what I am being invited into. Whatever was pales in comparison to what could be, and it pales in comparison to what God is inviting us into, which is what he goes on. And ultimately, this is great news for those of us when we look back and we see pain and frustration, whether it's because of COVID, whether it's because of struggling marriages or relationships, maybe it's purpose and career, and kind of when we look back and it's frustrating, we just see this kind of bleakness or pain. When we look back, we get excited about the thought that maybe the future is better. There's something better. There's something more in the future. This is great news for us. For those of us that look back and feel like they have been able to manage and be successful and they've got it all put together, I think that this is maybe uncomfortable news. But maybe the systems that you are ranking everything to, they don't quite carry as much weight as you think that they do. Paul says he counts it all worthless based on this new way of living. He goes on in verse 12, and he says, not that I have already obtained this or have already arrived at my goal, but I press on to take hold of that for which Christ Jesus took hold of me. Brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it, but one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining towards what is ahead, I press on towards the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. Paul, the Apostle Paul, the man who had everything in his life going for him. He had wealth and fame and notoriety. He was a religious leader. He was respected and recognized and feared by many people. He sacrificed, gave all of it up when he ultimately was converted into believing that Jesus was the Son of the living God, that he truly was crucified and died and resurrected on the third day. He gave all of that up and committed his life to traveling as a missionary to share the good news of Jesus with people that weren't even Jewish. Paul, the ultimate Jew, the one who tried to protect all things from the Israel nation and keep the laws the way that they were supposed to do. Paul gave up everything to spend his time on a boat and on roads by himself most of the time to share the good news with people that he was not connected to even in the least bit. Paul thinks that he hasn't quite made it yet. He has not quite taken hold of the goodness that God has planned for him. He's not quite figured out ultimately what God is going to use him to do. This is a man that many of us would look up to and say, man, it's not going to get better than Paul. And Paul would say, everything that I have done, a lot of it I count as worthless. In the recent history, the things that I have done have been in the right direction, but I still have not taken hold. So he says, forgetting what is behind and straining towards what is ahead, I press on towards the goal. I'm going to press on to take hold of what God has called me to. And as we look back over the last 6 months, as we look back over the last year, 6 years, as we start to navigate all kinds of realities of our past, many of us feel like we have been running a race and we are exhausted. Many of us feel like we have been moving and trying and putting in effort, and there's even kind of an invisible stress that we have all been carrying over the last 6 months. This stress that we don't even recognize that we have, because all of our comforts and all of our coping mechanisms and all of these things that we used to usually be able to kind of let off steam and let off stress, we didn't even recognize what those things were. Those have all been taken from us as well. So as we look back, there is a level of exhaustion, I think, just across the board for most people I know that I've never seen in my entire life. And maybe it's specifically COVID related. Maybe it's just because of other factors. And I'm not downplaying any of those factors. And I don't want to overemphasize COVID, and I don't want to downplay is the word I'm looking for, downplay the other aspects of our life, because the reality is I know people that have been struggling through divorce also dealing with COVID. I know people that have lost jobs also dealing with COVID. I know people that are going through massive life changes and struggles and challenges. So it's not just this one thing. There's 1,000 things happening. I think a lot of us, when this started, we kind of had this sprint kind of idea in our mind. March 12th, everything is shutting down in California. Like, okay, like let's batten down the hatches and we'll just make it through these 2 weeks. Remember that? We'll make it, we'll navigate, we'll get through it. And so we're just running as fast as we can. And for some people, many people actually felt like they had to work harder than they ever had before, even though they were at home. For some people, there was a sense of they had to work harder for their family's benefit. They had to work harder to stay healthy if they had health conditions that put them at a higher risk. There was a sense that people were sprinting. And then what we quickly realized, as the sprint felt like it was coming to a close, we realized, oh, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And then we start to head into a lot of the racial tension that was happening, and then protests and riots and counter-protests and counter-riots. And there was all of this chaos. And then all of a sudden, it's like, man, I was sprinting already, and now I got to keep running this marathon. And then all of a sudden, as the marathon starts to wrap up and we're like dragging ourselves across this finish line, we look up and there's somebody that's holding a bike and they're like, oh no, it's an Ironman. Now you've got to finish the Ironman, because as we look forward, there's more to come. We've got politics, we've got elections, we've got all kinds of stuff coming down the pipe. There's a valid reason to be tired. There's a valid reason to be frustrated, to be exhausted. Whether it's COVID related, whether it's other aspects of life, relationships, finances, emotional health, there's so many different reasons to be tired. I'm not sure where you are today. Maybe you feel exhausted and defeated. Maybe you're feeling fine and you've figured out kind of a way to kind of find like a cruise control, and you're like, well, I don't know that I'm like crushing it, but we're okay. We're making it. Or maybe you're feeling great and you're like, yeah, I feel like we're doing well. You know, we haven't felt a lot of ramifications of this. Things seem to be falling into place. Regardless of which category you fall into, and this is what I think is so important for us to hold on to. Regardless of which category you may fall into, what we can pull from Paul's teaching is that regardless of what was, it is time to press on and to take hold of what is to come. Regardless of what was, it's time for us to let go of that, to pivot, to have this dividing line, and for us to say, I know that I haven't quite got it figured out, that there's something more that God has for me. There's something new. There's something different. I think for many of us, there's something better or more healthy that God has for us in the future. I haven't quite experienced it yet, regardless of whether it's been bad or mediocre or great, because Paul had many of those same things. He said, man, I haven't gotten a hold of it quite yet. So I press on to take hold of what Christ has for me. The reality is that God has much more that he desires for us and from us. And I think in some ways that may sound even more exhausting to you. My wife has this joke. I don't know how much of it is actually a joke, but a lot of times I'll ask for things or other people will ask for things and she'll just say, sounds like more work. And my fear is that as I talk about this idea of forgetting what is past and pressing on to take hold, that some of you guys would be like, yeah, sounds like more work, Chris. I'm barely hanging on as it is. That's my fear. But I think that the reality for us is an invitation that there is more better ahead, that there is more better, there is more freedom, that there is more hope, that there is more fulfillment, that there is more purpose. And even if you have experienced that over the last 6 months or 6 years or 16 years, even if you've experienced that in the past, what I truly believe is that there is more available in the future. And Paul, who, if anybody had figured it out, said, I don't think I've figured it out yet. So I press on to take hold of that which Christ has taken hold of me for. Pressing on, taking hold, a new goal. There's another letter in the New Testament. The book is called Hebrews, and it uses a similar theme and addresses kind of this same sense of exhaustion or anxiety or defeat or worry that many of us may feel. Or maybe even just like a sense of comfort of, man, I think I'm doing okay. I don't want to change anything. In Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1, it says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and the perfecter of our faith. And then in verse 12, skipping ahead a couple verses, Paul, or the writer, says, so take a new grip with your tired hands and strengthen your weak knees. Mark out a straight path for your feet so that those who are weak and lame will not fall but become strong. Since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, and he's specifically talking about all the people that came before him. And I think for us that's true, but I think it's also there's so many people that are watching and looking for someone to give an example of what does it mean to find hope in the middle of despair? What does it mean to find peace in the midst of worry? What does it mean to find comfort when everything feels painful and difficult? There is a great cloud of witnesses watching, and Paul, or the writer of Hebrews, he says, therefore, since we're surrounded, let us throw off everything that hinders, whatever it is that is slowing you down, and the sin that so easily entangles. So let's get rid of the bad stuff and even just the good stuff that is slowing us down to run the race that has been marked out for us. And then he says, so take a new grip with your tired hands and strengthen your weak knees. And so the question that I feel like begs to be asked of myself and of you and of each one of us is one that you may have been asked before. Where do you need to get a grip? I grew up in the South, and everybody used to say this phrase, get a grip. And I don't know where it came from. Maybe you guys had that in California also. But it sounded pretty ridiculous with that North Carolina Southern accent. Where do we need to get a grip? What is the area? As this writer says, take a new grip with your tired hands and strengthen your knees. There are things that have been exhausting, and we are not sure how much control we have, how much longer we can hold on, if we can make it another step forward. And the writer is saying, take a new grip and strengthen your knees because there is a path that you need to continue moving forward on. This is the dividing line. This is where you get your second breath. This is where you pick yourself up. What does it look like at home? Do you need to get a grip at home with your family, with your spouse, with your roommates? Do you need to fight back against the exhaustion and the frustration that you feel like you just want to kind of succumb to and just let it have its way? But what Jesus is calling us to is to say, no, this is the time, this is the moment, this is the pivot for us where we say, no, I'm not going to let my home go that way. I'm not going to let my family, my kids, our relationship, I'm not going to let it go that way. Where do you need to get a grip in your work? As you feel defeated and frustrated and sick of Zoom calls and all of the new unknowns. And for many people, your jobs have changed. And what your job description used to be, it doesn't look like that anymore because the whole world is upside down. That is a defeating and frustrating thing. But where do you need to get a grip? Get a new grip with your hands and strengthen your tired, weak knees and continue moving forward. What's up with your finances right now? Are you just spending to ease and numb the pain of the rest of your life? Where do you need to get a grip? In relationships, friendships, family relationships that have inevitably taken a hit because everybody, every single person that I know right now is right about everything. And it is tiring, and it is frustrating, and it is hurtful. Some of the things that our friends and that our family members have said, either directly to us or indirectly, and instead of just releasing and saying, you know what, I can't do it anymore, what does it look like for us to take a new grip and to strengthen our weak knees? What about your relationship with Jesus? Because if it's anything like mine, the last 6 months has looked a lot like this. God help me. It has looked a lot like, God, I need you to show up. I need you to do all of this for me because I don't know if I have anything to add to this relationship. And there are some relationships, there are some seasons where that is crucial. And one of the gifts that we have in our relationship with Christ is that he is faithful and that God's mercies are new every morning and that he is strong and is actually made stronger in our weakness. So there are some seasons where that is okay, but a relationship cannot thrive when it is one-sided like that. You cannot carry someone forever. So where do you need to take a new grip in your spiritual life, in your relationship with God? Instead of it just being the prayers of needing and needing and needing, what does it look like for you to say, God, I'm grateful? What does it look like for you to carve out time to read scriptures and the gospels and to remember who Jesus is and to give honor and glory and praise and thankfulness to the way that God shows up and the beauty of creation and the ways that he's provided? What does it look like for you to take a new grip in your spiritual life to strengthen your weak knees? You can't just say all of these areas need a new grip. We have to be specific. Because the reality is if we don't say specifically what it is, whether it's out loud, whether we write it down, if we don't say specifically, then we will do nothing in general. But we have got to articulate, this is the area that I've got to take a new grip. These are the two areas that I'm going to focus on. This is the weekend. It is time to pivot. There is a dividing line. There is a before and there's an after. And I know I have not yet taken hold of all that God intends for me, but I am going to today. I'm going to move at it. I'm going to press on. I'm going to take a new grip and strengthen my weak knees. One of the greatest cinematic masterpieces of my lifetime is a movie called Cool Runnings. It is about a Jamaican bobsled team, and I jest about the greatest cinematic masterpiece, but it is legitimately a fantastic movie. It's one of my favorites. I remember as a kid, I don't remember how old I was really, but when it came out, I remember we saw it like 4 times in the movie theater, and I was never more excited than the day I got to introduce that movie to my kids, who obviously loved it because it's phenomenal. If you don't know the movie, it's been out for a long time, and so these are spoiler alerts, but you've had your chance to watch it. So it's based off the true story of the first Jamaican bobsled team. And it's all these random guys from Jamaica, and they decide that they want to compete in the Olympics and the four-man bobsled, and two of them have been friends since they were children, and kind of grew up with each other, and obviously when they show up to Calgary for the Olympics, that everybody is kind of chuckling, like the Jamaican bobsled team doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and they weren't very good at it. They struggled a lot. They were kind of the laughing stock, and especially the evil Swedish team. I mean, it's like, come on, guys, you got to take it easy on the Jamaicans. But they were kind of the laughing stock, and nobody thought that they could do it. And but they had all of this passion and all of this desire, and they wanted to compete and they wanted to place. And so it kind of documents the whole story, and they end up qualifying to actually make the Olympics, which nobody thought that they would even qualify. The time comes and they're doing their Olympic run and they're just flying and everybody is kind of amazed. Everybody is amazed at their start times. They're going down the course and they're taking the turns and they're like it's unrecognizable compared to who this team had been. Um, well, one of the bolts that's connecting the blade on the bobsled comes off, and the blade comes off, and the bobsled flips over and it crashes. It's just this brutal crash, and it's just kind of ping ponging back and forth down the course, and it comes to a stop, and it's just dead silent. And the crowds everywhere alongside the course, they're all kind of hovering around to see if they're okay. And one of the guys, there's two friends, and he says, Doris, are you dead? And Doris is the driver, and they'd been friends forever. And there was this ongoing bit where every time they would get into an accident or get into trouble, they would say, "Are you dead?" And the other one would say, "Yeah, man, I'm dead." So he says in this moment, he says, "Doris, are you dead?" And Doris says, "No, I'm not. I've got to finish." And so he pulls himself out of the bobsled, which is half, is toppled over, and he takes off his helmet, and all of the beautiful orchestral music starts playing, and your eyes well up with tears. And then through the mess, you see this bobsled team carrying the bobsled because they want to finish the race. And all of the people that had been mocking them, and all of the people that didn't believe, and even the one guy's father who was angry, I mean, it was just everything. All of a sudden, the slow clap, which gets, I mean, a sports movie, is there anything more powerful than the slow clap? And it speeds up and the crowd starts cheering and the music builds. And there is this beauty of this moment where everything was working against them and they had every reason to quit. And he says, "No, I am not dead. I am going to finish." And I think that that entire movie is based off of what Paul said. I was kidding. But it is the same thing. Take a new grip with your tired hands. There is a great cloud of witnesses. So press on. Take off all of the things that easily entangle us. Take off everything that's slowing us down, the good things and the bad things, the good things that you have chosen and the bad things that you have chosen, the good things that have happened to you and the bad things that have happened to you. Take that stuff off because there is a race to finish. And this weekend, this Labor Day weekend, this weird time in our calendar where everything pivots and you're not allowed to wear white anymore or whatever the things are. It's this weird time, and this can be the time for you. This can be the time for me. We can pivot and we can finish the race because I guarantee God has more for us ahead than he does in the past. And it's not that the past doesn't matter. It's not that those things don't count. It's not that we can't learn from the past, but it is not enough for us to just say, "Man, I'm here now and this is what it is." We are called to take a new grip, to press on, to take hold of all that Christ has taken hold of us for. There's more in the future. One of the simplest ways, I just want to give you a really practical way to do this, and I'll wrap up with this. One of the simplest ways to kind of reassess things in your life, to figure out what are the things that are entangling, the things that are slow that I can let go of. They're not necessarily bad or wrong, but I just need to kind of move away from these things. There's other things that are bad, the sin, the ways that I'm struggling. I need to defeat these things with the power of the Spirit. The easiest lens that I have found to start to process through this is through four symbols. And for those of you that hate math, I apologize. Through plus, minus, less than, and greater than. And ultimately, what this means, and if you're watching at home, you can write this down. If you're on your computer or your phone, just think through these symbols. What do you need to add to your life? What do you need to add to your routine? What do you need to add to your day? The way that you wake up, the way that you end the day, your time at home, your time at work. What do you need to add? Um, one of the things for us is that I've been really challenging. If you consider South Hills home, I've been challenging our church for the last few weeks. It is time to re-engage. And I don't necessarily mean that you all need to show up in person, although some of you can. Some of you have decided that you're willing to be around other people, and I would encourage you to start showing up in person to our outdoor service at 10:30. But you can re-engage even if you are still keeping social distance, even if you are still watching online. If you live outside of Orange County, there are ways for you to engage and to serve and to participate in what does it mean to be a part of South Hills Church. And it's not because I need a lot of people to be a part of South Hills Church. It's because when you engage, when you are volunteering and serving others, it does something in your own heart. It changes and it shapes your own heart. It gives you this sense of importance and purpose. It's beyond yourself. When you engage and you sign up to be a part of a group, whether it's a group in person in a backyard of somebody's house, or whether it's an online group, we're going to be launching groups in about 3 weeks. We've got signups coming. When you re-engage in these ways, it's a way to remember, man, I am not alone. And my problems are not the worst problems. I'm not doing worse than everybody, and I'm not doing better than everybody, but we get to walk in this journey together. Some of us, we need to add intentional prayer time and scripture reading into our routines. What do you need to add? What do you need to remove? What negative influences do you need to take out? What are the things you need to just cut out completely? What do you need to dial back? What are the things that maybe you could just use a little bit less of? Netflix, HBO Max, Disney Plus. That's my list. I don't know what yours is. What do you need just a little bit less? It's not necessarily wrong, it's not necessarily bad, but maybe I can just sacrifice a little bit of that in order to be able to press on. And then what do you need to increase? What do you need to lean into? What do you need to bring more into your routine? It's a simple kind of way to approach it, but I think it's a helpful thing for us to consider. If you don't have any other tool, what do you need to add? What do you need to remove? What do you need to decrease? What do you need to increase? And if you don't have a filter, I think one of the best filters we can use to make these kind of decisions is in Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, where he says, summing it all up, my friends, I would say that you will do best by filling your minds and meditating on things that are true and noble and reputable and authentic and compelling and gracious, the best, not the worst, the beautiful, not the ugly, things to praise, not things to curse. And that alone would cause most of you to get off of social media. That alone would cause most of you to dial back the amount of news content that we watch. That alone would cause most of us to engage in our friendships differently than we have been in the past. This is a filter for us to make decisions, to be able to see our minds and our hearts be transformed into what Christ desires for us, to experience the hope and to be able to have the strength to take a new grip and to strengthen our weak knees and to move forward and to pick up our bobsled, to do whatever it takes to recognize that there is more in front of me, there is more better, there is more greater, there is more meaning. It will not all be easy, it will not all be perfect, but there is more that Christ has called me to, and so I am going to press on to take hold of all of that. Let's pray together.